Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to attend our webinar on teaching critical and creative thinking, presented by Dr. Ken Beatty. I'm Chantal Legault, ELT specialist based in Montreal, and I would like to introduce you quickly to my team, my colleague Debra Kshak, who is sharing with me the representation in the province of Quebec, and my colleague Bill Situ, who is based in Vancouver and who looks after the Western Canadian provinces, Ontario, and the Maritimes. You might not be familiar with our new name, TC Media ELT, but you probably already know our Canadian, well-established Canadian ELT resources. Just to name a few: LEAP, Connections, Advance in Academic Writing, Avenues Become, and many more. We have been publishing quality English language teaching materials for over 25 years, previously under the Longman, Pearson ELT, and FP ELT brands, and now as part of the TC Media Books family. We're a Montreal-based company, and we are known for our 40 years of excellence and leader in educational technology. So we're continuing our mission to offer high quality English language teaching materials to meet the needs of English teachers and students in higher education programs in Canada and worldwide, and not to forget that our resources are developed with Canadian authors, and they are also, they're developed with Canadian authors, and they are tailored to the needs of our students. So we are honored to introduce you today to Dr. Ken Beatty. He is currently a TESOL professor at Anaheim University and holds a PhD in computer-assisted language learning. He has worked in secondary schools and universities in Asia, the Middle East, North and South America, and lecturing on language teaching and learning from primary through university levels. As such, he is the author of Teaching and Researching Computer-Assisted Language Learning, and also the author of more than 100 student textbooks. And he has given countless conference presentations in more than 33 countries around the world, as well as teacher training sessions. So before we start this presentation, I would like to inform you that this webinar will be recorded, but we will stop the recording once we start the question session. So I shall now give the floor to Dr. Ken Beatty, and I will see you later.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chantal. I hope everything's okay. You can see me and hear me, and as well as the presentation. Greetings to everyone from Halifax, Nova Scotia. We're talking today about teaching critical and creative thinking in the age of AI. AI, you have to live under a rock not to know that AI is artificial intelligence. It has become the biggest part of our life over the last couple of years. So we're going to discuss some ideas of how it's impacting our teaching and learning of languages. Okay, so in this one, you can see I've got an owl here. What's with the owl? Why does he have an owl in the front there? In fact, I'm using the owl as a kind of a metaphor for artificial intelligence. Why an owl? Well, everybody thinks about owls and they think, oh yes, owls are so wise. They're a symbol of wiseness, of wisdom, but in fact they are not. They are not avian eggheads. And actually, in fact, they're among the least intelligent of birds. They're not very social. But I blame Athena, the ancient Greek goddess Athena. She had as a companion an owl who often sat on her shoulder. The owl would whisper little news from afar and let her know what was going on in the world. And she would use that because she was the goddess of wisdom. But just patiently staring at things, it's not a sign of intelligence. Instead, owls have, curiously, some AI-like qualities. They're predator skills, really: waiting, watching, and hunting. And we see AI going through the World Wide Web, going through the internet, and actually looking and hunting for language, images, videos, other things that it can use to share with other people. Okay, but the question is how does AI think? So you have to imagine that we have actually only recently, in the last 50 years or something, are we getting really a good idea about how the human brain thinks. And during that time, we haven't had so much time to think about how machines are thinking, and this is really something quite different. So at the text level, it's mostly collocations, words that commonly go together. You say salt and pepper, black and white TV. You think about many words and phrases that commonly go together. The higher the frequency, the more likely the word or phrase will be chosen by AI to complete a sentence. Mary had a little. Well, it could be many things. Mary had a little watch, or she had a little basket, or she had a little shoe. But in fact, what's the most common collocation is Mary had a little lamb. So that's with text, but what about images? Often they're misunderstood, and the earliest Chat GPT and other programs using artificial intelligence in selecting images had a great difficulty with certain subjects, and one of them was hands. I can barely look at this picture; it's so horrible. So many fingers going in so many directions, and they simply don't make sense. So AI, artificial intelligence, is easily confused. It doesn't really understand how things work. So again, each of these points, I'm sharing this because it gives us insights into the intelligence or lack of intelligence of AI. What about the genre level? The genre, when we say genre, we mean written or spoken examples like CVs, like a curriculum vitae, or a book, or a poem, or even in speech, like speech, a presentation, a talk of some kind. AI does the same thing as it does with text. It looks at billions of examples, and it does what is called a best fit. But again, it's often confused, such as this AI-generated CV. Really? Are you kidding me? Would you hand this in as a CV for a job? I don't know, maybe if you were a movie star or something like that, but it's this weird thing that looks like somebody who's maybe an outdoor guide or something. But again, it's not normally what you would send in as a curriculum vitae. So again, what's the point? The point is AI, artificial intelligence, is not intelligent. It just basically is putting things together in curious ways. One curious thing, though, to know about AI is, you know how often you do something and then you say, that's wrong, try again. All of those try agains are giving information back to artificial intelligence programs like ChatGPT and saying, you're making mistakes, figure out what's the problem here, and so that it does better next time. So it does improve, it continues to improve. But it does have problems with very specific subjects. One of them is time. So this was the instruction here. Draw 100 clocks in a collage and give each one with different times. Do you see different times there? Absolutely not. They're all the same time. Why are they the same time? AI seems incapable of using anything other than 1010 or maybe 150. That seems to be the only things that it can use. And I think all of these ones are actually just 1010. Why is that? Well, again, it's because it's taking reference images. It's taking reference images from the internet, and as it looks through all those reference images, it finds things that looks like a watch, but then it sees all these watches are with this, with the hands like this. Why did they do that? Well, of course, the advertisements do that because they want to put the name of the watch, such as Timex in this case, in the center. So because there's billions of images like this, AI just thinks that watches look like this. So again, it doesn't understand the concept of time. It doesn't understand how clocks work. It doesn't understand how your watch goes forward and shows different times. Okay, and garbage in, garbage out is a big problem. And these Google images were an enormous problem. Google brought out a brand new, brand new, exciting new AI. They thought, okay, well, this will be the best one. But somebody went in and said, create pictures of soldiers during in the German army during, and they gave 1939 to 1945. Well, that was during World War II. So what does it do? It tries to give German uniforms, which is okay, so far so good. But then look at the people in them. It created something that it thought it should do, because in the subroutines, in the instructions to the artificial intelligence, it was trying to be, more offer more diversity, more inclusion, and so to try including not just men but also women, not just white men but also black men or an Asian woman in this case. But that was historically inaccurate, because, of course, during Nazi Germany, they were actually trying to kill those people, and they didn't let women into the armed services at that time. So we create historical inaccuracies that you probably know. You look at this and you laugh, you think this is stupid, a stupid image. But, for a young student doing research, do they understand this? Probably not. And that, because we are teachers and we're working with learners, we have to be so cautious about the materials that they receive. I write a lot of textbooks. I don't write them by myself. I have a team. The last series that I wrote, there were 211 people working on the series at the same time, 8 levels. But it's, I always have a big team of editors and sub-editors and copy editors and everybody looking at the work that I do to make sure that it comes out perfect. And AI doesn't have those guardrails. Okay, along with this are something called hallucinations. Sometimes it just invents information. And it's like a little puppy who wants to please you. So it does things, runs around in circles when that's really not what you want. It's really creating information, like for me, some of my students, and I teach graduate students and doctoral students, teachers who are doing their MA or PhDs. And one of my students was writing a paper, and I said, yes, go ahead, use ChatGPT. He did, and it wrote a reference for me. And a quotation, and put in the citation in the text and the reference at the back, but I hadn't written it. It was just extrapolating and trying to give him what it thought he wanted. So it was not correct. And these photos, they look perfect. I mean, to me, I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not that old. And so I don't know, but they look historically accurate, but they are not. And so we have to be very careful about the lies that AI is telling us. Robots also show us how AI thinks in physical ways. And at the picture on the left of the big warehouse with all the boxes and such, a curious thing that you look at, if you look carefully, you see the boxes are actually piled up in many cases in different sizes. That's because it's been organized by AI using robots. And they stack the boxes, not basically all the same ones in the same place, but some internal logic that it's using. And we're not sure what that logic is. We can sort of see it also happening in the little video, which I hope you can see here. But these little robots going around picking up packages and then dropping them down to go on to underlying conveyor belts that sort of take them the different directions. The curious thing about both of these pictures that's wrong is that actually they're dark. They operate in the dark in the most cases. They don't need things. They don't need any lights to work. What's the problem? What's the problem that we face with all of this? AI, as well as robots, do not think as we do. They are thinking ways that are chaotic to us. It's economical for AI. It allows it to work its best way. But AI is not intelligent. It is not ethical, and it is not wise. Would you do this to a baby? Of course not. It's horrific. It looks so beautiful, but who would tattoo a baby? Are you crazy? Nobody's going to do this. And yet AI thinks this is an acceptable image of some kind. So, okay, so this is a general points. And really all I'm trying to say is, how does AI think? how does it think? And that's really what we're concerned about. Okay, it is capable of great things. And one of the greatest things I've seen recently is a new video. This is actually just an advertisement at this point for a BBC series. And they cloned Agatha Christie's image. They cloned her voice. They had some video of her as well as we're moving around. And they created this full color sort of little videos of her talking, typing and doing work. And she's giving writing advice based on some information that she wrote. And then other writers have come in to sort of help fill in the corners of that, of those ideas. So it is absolutely amazing. But artificial intelligence lacks skills that people have and which students need to learn and develop. And who's going to help them to do that? We are, as teachers, especially as language teachers. So one of the big things we're helping them with is research shows that relying on artificial intelligence tools diminishes two key things: students' critical thinking and students' creative thinking. And you probably think about this all the time yourselves, well, you know, if you're worried about students plagiarizing or something, but even going back to yourself. How's your math skills, right? I started my career as a general secondary school teacher. I taught English and social studies, and I also taught mathematics. But man, when a calculator came out, I remember the day in class when a friend brought a scientific calculator and showed our high school teacher. He said, "Yes, but you can't carry a calculator around with you all the time." And then I thought, "Oh yes, I can, Mr. Durbin. I got one on my watch now." But has it made us less intelligent in doing calculations? I think so. I think actually our mathematical abilities have gone down because we can use things like calculators. Now, this is not a new problem, of course. Every technology that's introduced to the classroom changes the nature of teaching and learning, sometimes positively, sometimes very positively, sometimes negatively. People, when we had film machines, we could show moving pictures in the classroom. How exciting was that? But telephones in the classroom and students constantly checking their social media, maybe that's a bit of a headache. So part of our job is also seeing how we can make the most of technology. So today, part of what I'm going to say is, okay, these are some issues with things that we should be teaching. These are some problems with AI, but also these are some ways we can use artificial intelligence to improve teaching and learning. So let's go through those. One issue around this is something we call locus of control. And Chang and Ho talk about this idea of control over technologies has increasingly shifted from the teacher to the student. So on one hand, this is good technology. It encourages autonomy, and we like students to be independent and working on things on their own. But on the other hand, it can be unmanageable in the classroom in some cases. So what do I mean by this? What's a practical example? Well, 1925 radio. Radio was used in the classrooms for the first time. So how exciting, right? And who was in charge of that? The teacher. 1950 headphones. Who handed them out? The teacher. 51 videotapes. Who was at the front of the class turning it on and off? The teacher. Educational television was the same, but it started to leak into homes where people could watch some shows at home. And then in 1964, the language lab. And I think this to me is a kind of a turning point because it was a personal one, not in 64. But when I went to university, in my first years of university, Estudio Español, when I was studying Spanish, I would go to the language lab, and it was confusing and exciting for me. And I said, well, do we wait for the teacher? And the assistant there said, no, the teacher's not coming. You just pick the tape and you sit in the booth and you do it yourself. So the shift, you see the locus of control, suddenly I was in control of my own learning with the technology. And that's a good thing. Laptops came along, phones came along, and now everything has changed. So there are three consequences of all these ideas for language learnings: critical thinking, creative thinking, and one more that we haven't talked about so far, which is memory. How does it impact or affect our memory in different ways? We'll go through each of these in turn. By the way, just before we get into the big meat of this, I want to say that two things. One, afterwards, the video of this presentation will be available to you. So if you want to watch it again, you missed a point, you said, what was he talking about? That's going to be available along with a PDF of the presentation. So if you just want to look at it on paper, each of the slides, and pick up some of the information, maybe even the references at the end, and check those out, you can do that. The second key point is the most important information in the entire presentation is on the last slide, and that's my email. So if you have any questions, you can email me afterwards. Don't be shy. Love to hear from teachers. Let's go. Critical thinking is our first consequence. What is critical thinking? Let's define these first. So critical thinking is when you question things, when you have a question and then you analyze, interpret, evaluate, and you make some kind of a judgment based on your thinking about what you've read, what you've heard, what other people say or write in different cases. We use the example of a cat. Oh, poor little cat up in a tree, right? Everybody has seen a cat in a tree. We start with a problem and we go to a solution. We try to think of a solution. So in this case, cat's up in the tree. How do I get the cat down? And you think and you come up with a solution. I'm going to use a ladder. Okay, so it's a very traditional one. Some people will call the fire department and they'll come along and they have a big ladder to go up in the tree to rescue, the kitty Muffins. So that's one thing. There's different ways of thinking about problems, though. And Benjamin Bloom was working actually at the University of Chicago, and he looked at tests. That was his job, was looking at all of the tests that professors were giving. And as he looked at the tests, he started scratching his head and said, what kind of questions are they asking? So many of you, I know you've seen the taxonomy of educational objectives. It's so common. He wrote it in 1956, and again, what he wanted to do with it was to improve the quality of education by making professors at the University of Chicago more aware of the types of questions they were asking. And now all of us should be more aware of it as well, because it continues to be popular. So in the revised taxonomy, which was redone by one of his students or associates in 2001 and some other people, he sort of had this these 6 levels, and it starts at the very bottom. The most basic type of a question is to remember something. So remembering is not a critical thinking skill. It's just, something like name a verb. Okay, I can remember a verb. Then you go up a step, a different one. What is a verb? That's understanding. So that's a little more challenging of a question. And then you go up again. You go to apply. Use a verb in a sentence. Can you do that, right? And so that's a more difficult type of a question, but it's still not critical thinking. That comes in when we get to analyze, and it comes with this keyword why. Why do we do something? So why do we use that verb? And it's a much more difficult question, as is the next step. Evaluate. So why are some verbs also nouns? Like talk. I talk right now to you, and I am giving a noun talk, right? So a verb, or it could be a verb or a noun. So why is that? Why are some verbs also like that? Some are not, right? Or some, when we use them, they might have slightly different meanings, right? So play as a verb, I'm playing, in the sandbox, but a play as a noun is actually a different thing there. Why is that? You were talking about actors on stage. Okay, it's all confusing and getting into different things, but it involves critical thinking. So what's the critical thinking process? What exactly is the process that we go through? So I'm going to say that there's 6 steps, starting with identify a problem, research, gather information, evaluate biases. Okay, so what do we already think about the topic? Infer something, assess contrasting arguments, not just thinking what you think, but saying what does everybody else think, and then making a decision based on what you've learned. I'm going to talk about these things one at a time and go through them, then go on to creative thinking, then go on to memory. But as I do so, I'm going to use a couple of examples, and I'm going to use some examples from, surprise, some books that I wrote for TC Media ELT, and these are the Learning English for Academic Purposes series. Don't worry, if you don't use the books, it doesn't matter. A lot of the principles are there in many of the other textbooks that you'll be using already. And maybe you don't teach, this level of students, you teach, a primary school or something. That's fine. The principles are the same. So I'm really just trying to use it to illustrate the principles involved. So keep that in mind. And as we go through, if you're not using LEAP or something, then think about the books you're using and saying, oh yeah, how could I use those in the same way? Let's begin, starting with identifying a problem. So asking questions and identifying problems is what we call a habit of mind. So some people, I think, I don't know, they don't ask, they don't ask questions all the time. And I know right now you're thinking about that relative you have or your friend who says, is he never curious or is she never curious or something? But a habit of mind is something I know you have because you're educated, you're teachers already. So you get into that habit where you look at things and you're always asking questions about them. Some students naturally do when they come to us, fantastic, and we're so happy to have them, but other ones need a little bit of help. Again, this is one of the countless jobs of teachers. They never end. There's so many different things that we do in the classroom beyond teaching nouns and verbs and parts of language, right? So we want to develop their curiosity. So a habit of mind begins with asking questions, and some of the questions are these ones, which are great ways to start every single class. So whatever the topic is, say today, okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're studying owls today. And so I would start every class like this by saying, what do you know about owls? And they would say, oh, well, I know that owls are hunters. They hunt at night, often, things like that. Okay, that's great. Let's park that information and see. What don't you know about owls? And they will think, I've heard that they can rotate their heads. They can rotate their heads like a long way or something like that, but I don't know how, right? I don't know how far. The answer is 270 degrees. That's really far. Don't try this yourself. What do you think you know, but might be wrong about? Well, you might say, oh, I know they eat things, so they chew on mice and other things. Okay, you think you know that, but that's wrong. Actually, owls cannot chew. They don't have any teeth. They only have the beaks, the sharp little beaks. So what do? They either swallow something whole or they chew it, they tear it into little pieces, and then they eat the little pieces. And something else, they have 2 stomachs. I don't have time to tell you all about that, but maybe you're interested in owls now. Okay, this habit of mind, though, is getting students curious, not just about, what they don't know, but maybe reflecting on whether what they do know is true or not. Okay, a habit of mind. One thing we can do with students is instead of always asking students questions, ask, what question would you ask about this? And this is an example now. I'm taking an exercise from a book, but this is something you can do with any textbook that you're using. Just say, whatever the topic is, like down here, letter B, write one question you have about the Internet of Things. Use who, what, when, where, why, or how. So again, I'm developing their question abilities. And what I love about this question is that every student can write something different, right? You've got those basic, WH and how questions. And so every student can start thinking and they can write something different. What happens? What happens after that happens? Then we get into peer teaching. They say, oh, what was your question? Oh, I was asking this. Oh, what was your question? I was asking this. Well, what's the answer there? And scaffolded learning takes place where one student teaches the other student a little bit, and through discussion, they continue their education and learning. Now, I don't care what the topic is. With students, a lot of this is background, but there are hundreds of core words. All those words like, one, two, three, the, as, some, and that they use over and over again that are so important in English for them to practice, to improve their fluency, and to improve their thinking. So it's those little words whenever you get any topic. And of course, if they're excited about a topic, then they use more language. Everyone wins. Let's go on. Ask more open-ended questions. Now, closed-ended questions are necessary and they're useful, but they really only encourage recall. They don't encourage critical thinking. So, most of the team is in Montreal today. We say, okay, what's the biggest city in Quebec, right? Okay, what's your guess? Montreal. It's a boring question, right? Because one student puts up their hand, Montreal, and that's the end of the discussion. But you could ask another question, an open-ended one. Say, why? Why is Montreal the biggest city in Quebec? Right? And, oh, well, I guess because it's a port. Oh, well, I guess because it's, the connections. Oh, well, because, and they start thinking of different ideas and the conversation flows. Again, through that conversation, they start educating each other. But it's those why questions which are really key to critical thinking. Students need to be challenged to think about questions to which you may not know the answer. Now, many teachers are insecure about this. I don't know why, but if I don't know the answer, I say, I have no idea. And if you're worried about students asking questions, here's my 3 tips. Okay, when a student asks you a difficult question, now, I lived around the world. I taught in China for a long time. Most of my Chinese colleagues were terrified of being asked a question that they didn't know the answer to. Students would actually try to embarrass them with this, put up their hand on the first day. Teacher, what's the difference between the word will and shall, right? Which is difficult to explain in English and they might not know. But I always say, okay, there's 3 things you can say. Well, that's an excellent question, right? Oh, we don't have time today to discuss it, but tomorrow I'll explain it. Go home and look it up, right? Second way, say, oh, that's an excellent question. Can anyone here answer that question? Because of course your whole class, your other students are a resource to help you out. And the third one you can use, teaching tip, just say, excellent question. I want you to go home and research this and come and give us a presentation in 2 minutes tomorrow about the difference, right? So you shift the responsibility back to the students. Okay, it's fun. It's a fun way of doing things. All right. Promote thinking with difficult questions that start debates. Now, the best debates of all are the ones where the students are leaving the class at the end of the session and you hear them still talking about the topic. I love that. It means I've given subversive homework. I've started them thinking about an issue that they can't stop thinking about. So again, some difficult questions that start debates among students are good. This one is, again, a very contentious one. This was one we used in the book because of this. So there was a game developer at a university in Canada who was trying to gamify learning. And in this case, it was history. So he created this game around the Holocaust, the murder of the Jews, 6 million Jews and many other minorities during the Nazi regime. So is that really suitable for a game? It's not a lighthearted topic at all. So it's a big discussion. It was a big discussion you would have to have. And of course, there's the supporting materials there in their supporting materials there in the whole text to explain why he didn't and why he thought it was okay, and then other reasons why it's not. So students have something to eat with that. Okay, second point, the second stage of critical thinking: research and gather information. So students need to research and reflect on how content relates to them personally. Now, this is an important AI one, because if students just go to Google or just go to AI and say, Google or AI, ChatGPT, what's the answer? Or give me some research on this. It's going to be general. Once you say, personally, how does this impact you? Then ChatGPT can't answer that. They can't answer it, for me, I'm here in Halifax in Canada, and I'm a teacher, and, all the specifics about me. It can't gather up all of that information and give a perfect answer. So when you turn questions and make them personal, it means that they really do have to think, and they can't rely on artificial intelligence. So I hear people talking about plagiarism all the time. I say, just give them personal topics, then they can't use it, right? Nobody's going to use ChatGPT to discuss their family, right? They can't do that. It forces them to reframe the conversation and think to themselves, yeah, how does it affect me on all the big issues as well? The other one is to examine hypothetical situations that aren't really happening, but what if they do? So in this one, this was a unit that talked about a big power outage. So everybody lost all power, not for like a night because the lights went off, but like maybe forever. So what would happen? So this is teaching actually about a Venn diagram. So a Venn diagram: before the outage, you would take a bus, but you can't do that anymore because there's no power. So maybe people used to ride horses, but they can still ride horses. But after the outages, you would maybe walk most places. So okay, so this is, again, it's open-ended. It gives students opportunities to think. They think personally about what they would do. So again, it's developing their thinking skills by giving them hypotheticals. And there can be many, many answers. It's not just that there's one answer. The largest city in Quebec, Montreal. No, there's so many different answers, and they can keep going. The third issue here is to evaluate biases. Now, we all have biases. We all prefer certain things. We like certain things. It might be food, right? I love tacos. Oh no, I never eat, my wife never eats scallops. She's allergic or something. So we all have biases to do with our food, but also to do with our thinking, how we regard the world. A lot of that is shaped by our society around us, our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, but it's also shaped by the media, especially fake news that we get so much of today. AI creates dangerous biases. It creates so many false pictures, so many false images, so many false stories that sometimes we just don't know what to think anymore. Students need thinking tools to disambiguate. Disambiguate means separate out biases, facts, opinions, and beliefs, and sort all of those out. How do we do that? Well, one thing we can do is we can teach all the ways propaganda techniques. And again, this is built into this particular textbook series, but I really, it's a good thing for everybody to do with their students, to understand how people create these arguments. I think about this a lot because when I was first a young teacher, still a secondary school teacher, I was teaching some ideas around this, and I taught either or statements. And I say people often, make these either or arguments. So, and suddenly one of my students, he popped up in the class and I could see his eyes open up. And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, somebody presents that there's always just two choices. There's never two choices. There's always a third choice. There's always something else that can happen." So, but it's a false way of making an argument that there's only two choices, right? And he said, "Oh," and I could see him for the rest of the class, the wheels turning in his head. And afterwards, he came up to me after class and I said, "Are you okay? And something touched you there. I could see that in class." And he said, my whole life, my mother has been either you get a job or you will be a bum. You'll be on the street or something like that. Everything was like that with his mom. Everything was, two choices, and she always said either or, and she used that in every argument. So anyway, for him, it opened up his mind, and these sorts of things can open up our students' minds and protect them against false information. So teach propaganda techniques. The fourth idea is to infer. So to infer is to guess, right? To make that leap. But we don't just guess. We make an educated guess. We based on something that we understand. So we take evidence, we take clues, and we draw a conclusion somehow from that. There are things that are not really explicitly stated, and I love this little diagram. Okay, so it's a process for a company that makes things or something that I found actually. And they have a vision, a problem, and so they get some kind of a concept together, and then it says design it, and then build it, and then finally after that they got a product. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's easy to understand. But what's with the in the middle, this big squiggly stuff right there? Well, of course, that's all because it's a messy process. So how do you show that something is a messy process to design and to build something? So again, just with all those scratches and squiggles, they sort of showed that idea. So I like that idea. So again, you draw the conclusion. Does it say that? No, it's not explicitly stated, but it's you can infer that. Okay, teaching visual literacy. Genres constantly change, the digital age. Okay, we're always getting new genres now. And teaching and learning needs to change with them. Consider what students read and write online. Are they writing a lot of texts, things like that? What are they reading? Are they watching short videos, Instagram, things like that? Maybe we should look a little bit about those and say, how could we improve their critical learning? A big one is to do with images. And some of the most important images that students need to infer from are charts and graphs of different kinds. So teach them those ones so that when they look at a chart, they can really interpret what exactly is going on critically and say, is this very well drawn? I don't think the numbers actually work properly here, and they should be able to examine them. The fifth point is to assess contrasting arguments. We do a fun thing in this series where we take every two chapters, we take the two chapters and try to put them together. It was difficult. The chapters are on completely different ideas, but again, you can do this. Just take two chapters, two topics, and try to find what do they have in common? What are they different? What's a common topic for both of them? Maybe one is one on food, one is on clothing, and maybe your topic becomes shopping or something like that. Where do they meet in some way? Group work is important, and group work is important because for most of our educations, we work alone. It's always, work by yourself, to write the test by yourself, everything by yourself. Why? Why do that? Why not get them working in pairs and groups? Because when they do, they have to use language. So create opportunities for them to work with others, but teach them how to work with others, because most people don't know. So again, here's just a bunch of tips for working with other students. And, it basically is just things that they either already do or they think that maybe they should do. So just little strategies for that. And sixth one is making decisions. Finally, you've got all your information, you've examined it, you've looked at different arguments, you've made your inferences, and you make some decisions. But still, when you make a decision, you have to be able to discuss it. Or somebody else does. And so you want to ask for a response, ask for more detail, ask for clarification. You want to express an opinion about that, or you want to politely interrupt someone. And again, if they don't learn these things in schools and they haven't learned them in their own families, we've got to make an effort to teach them. Okay, explore sample answers to different types of questions. This is very, very important. There's different types of questions I get all the time at the end of a presentation, there'll be administrative questions like, oh, when will the video be available? Okay, so I can answer that. A challenge questions. Well, I don't agree that we should teach, artificial intelligence or anything, So that'll be a challenge to what I've been talking about. Clarification, what did you mean when you said this? And further information, where can I find out some extra information about something? And then you get off-topic questions, are you married? Really, someone asked me that. Somebody asked me that in a presentation once in Peru, and I was so like shocked by the question. Everybody laughed, but I said yes, I am. Sorry, too late. Rhetorical questions. So questions where the person's not really asking it, but they're just putting forward their own idea. How do you deal with each of these? That's important. We have to learn that. Okay, so we talked about critical thinking. Before we move on to creative thinking and memory, how can AI help critical thinking? Well, there's lots of different ways, and I'm sure you're thinking of ideas as we've gone along. AI can be helpful in providing contrary arguments. After students work on their own in their groups developing an argument, maybe ask it, say, what's the opposite argument for something? And then they can evaluate that. Again, it's just the thinking process has helped. Okay, the next one, creative thinking. Okay, so creative thinking is about thinking about new solutions. Let's remember our friend, Miss Muffy, the cat in the tree. Let's say we don't get a ladder. Maybe another solution is take a bowl of Miss Muffy's favorite food and put it at the bottom of the tree. Miss Muffy will figure out her own way to come down. So it's a creative solution. So when we use this example of all the different questions about remembering, understanding, and verbs, different ones. Here, to create, we say is at the pinnacle, the top, and that's to create a new verb. We create new words all the time, and here's a new verb. I can't stop doom scrolling. What's that mean? It means I can't stop looking at bad news. I just keep looking at the news. It's so terrible, but I can't stop myself. So doom scrolling, it's called, right? So what's the process in creative thinking? Okay, I would say there's 5 steps here, and there's references at the bottom. When we send you the PDF for these, you'll be able to see all of those references and follow up on them. Prepare, incubate, illuminate, evaluate, and verify. Let's go through each of these in turn. To prepare, students brainstorm. But brainstorm as many ideas as possible, and we don't stop them from thinking. Just come out with everything as much as possible. It's because sometimes the worst idea can inspire. At each stage benefits from group input, lots of people talking, lots of people thinking, so we get a multitude of ideas. In this particular chapter, it's talking about ideas about what if we could have animal implants, if we could be, see like an eagle or something like that. What would it be like if we could get new ones? And it talks about historical implants like hips in 1940, artificial skin in 1981, an artificial heart in 1969, and so on. So again, the next step is to incubate. After we brainstorm, let's incubate, which just means take a break, and let students really think about it. So if the question is, what animal implant would best improve your abilities? Which one would you really want to have yourself? Let the subconscious do the work. That means step back and give students time to think. You can assign it as homework. Illuminate is that eureka moment when they really think of a new idea. They come up with different solutions. And then we go on to the evaluate, and we try to make decisions. Do I want eyes like a cat, or ears like a rabbit or hare? Do I want a nose like a dog? What would be the best one? And then again, it's all about the debate and students thinking through these things. The verify is to challenge your own ideas, creative ideas, and the best way to do that is through debate. It's a language thing. Again, debates are fantastic to get students excited about a topic, arguing and presenting, right? So everybody's come up with a different implant idea, or teams have different, they all agree that better eyes would be the best thing, and then let them debate it. And it's a good chance to, again, improve their language. Okay, so how about AI? How does it help with creative thinking? Well, for any visual idea, here's a couple that I just made thinking about these ideas. If I had wings, or, if you could see like an owl with much better sight, all of these things are, can help out. But repeating the iterations, like trying version after version after version, will help to try to get you closer to the idea. And again, it's kind of a critical thing to look at this and say, well, that's not practical, or something, or that doesn't really work. Let's try again. Okay. The third one is memory. Memory. Okay, so what is memory? So each time we've defined these ideas, memory is how information is coded, how it's stored, and how it's retrieved. So memory is vital to language learning, of course. So if we learn a new language, you have to remember so much over a long period of time. How do we do that, though, is our big question. It's important because memory impacts everything. In many ways, our memories shape who we are. This is actually a writer talking about dementia and ideas about that as we get older and lose our memories. But Marshall says, they make up our internal biographies, the stories we tell ourselves about what we've done with our lives. That's our memories, right? But in the larger sense, we also need working memories for language, for everything we do, for our jobs and everything else. What about AI? What about memory and AI? Well, the bad news is that on-screen information of all kinds, even just reading the news online, is less likely to be remembered. If you read something in a book, if you have a conversation with another human, if you read a newspaper, you're more likely to remember than if you just look at something on screen like this. I'm a bit worried. Maybe you won't remember me tomorrow. Who knows? I blame Google. Students who grew up in the age of Google are used to looking up information rather than thinking about issues in depth.
Workshop. Sorry, agreed.
So,
Okay.
if your
This is the
microphone,
field trip team. Look
Can
at
you
the
turn
letter
off
and
your
see if it's
microphone?
okay before it comes in.
Sorry, can you turn off your microphone? Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so when we look up information, my family, no phones at the dinner table, right? We discuss and we argue and everything else, but it's the arguments, putting together the arguments, the why, that helps us to think more about the ideas. Okay, so how can students better remember? 4 steps: understand, link, self-test, and use spaced repetition. Let's explain those one at a time. So understanding, we talked on Bloom's second level of doing understand of basically of learning is it begins with having reasons to remember something. So always ask students, why do you think this is important to you? Why should you learn this? When will you use this information? That can really help students. Another thing is to have thought experiments to explore ideas. What if, the opposite was true? What if we didn't live in houses? What would we live in, or something? I don't know what it would be. But any topic, if you just take some strange idea and introduce it, again, it gets students thinking in this habit of mind of thinking, of asking questions and thinking in different ways. Linking is the second one. And a very extremely important aspect of linking is note-taking. Note-taking strategies are vital, but many students don't know how to note take. Instead, they try to write down everything that the teacher says, or worse, they try to record it on their phone or something, or videotape the teacher. Do they really go home and look at that all again? I don't think so. Actually, handwriting has been shown in studies to improve recollection and memory. Okay, self-testing. So fortunately, many books now, they have, like LEAP, like the one we've been showing examples from, they have digital components. And among those digital components are opportunities on apps or, on some sort of internet-based resources where they can take tests and test themselves. Sometimes once is enough. Oh yeah, I did the test, I got 100%, right? Other times students, less able students, maybe they can do it 100 times. Okay, spaced repetition. So spaced repetition is this idea of, you should study the night after you learn something, a week after, a few days after that, a week after that, a month after that. If you can't remember, go back to, a more intense schedule again. The other one is to use what we call ipstative assessment. And I love this one. On the first day of class, get your students to write something, get them to record themselves. They can use their phones for this. And then again 3 months, 4 months later, a year later, ask them to do the same task again, and they can compare the two. It's the most illuminating thing for students to be able to see how much they have progressed. Often they think, oh, I haven't learned anything in this class. But when they see how their, speaking and everything else has improved, that really, really makes a big difference. So here's a little tip that we have in one of the books about pronunciation. How can AI help with memory? Well, everyone learns and forgets things at different times. Students can use AI to write personal study guides. And I think this is really the great future in AI, is the personalization of it all, with explanations and exercises for ideas that they struggle with. We don't always have time in the classroom to teach, to answer every student's questions. Often students don't ask questions, they're embarrassed to, or they ask once and they still don't understand. Maybe AI can help them with that by creating personal tutors. But be careful, because AI, as we've seen at the beginning of this presentation, AI makes mistakes. Okay, what's left for humans to do? We've got all these robots, we've got AI coming, we hear the news every day about taking more jobs away from people. You phone up helplines, you realize this is not a human being I'm talking to, this is a machine. So artificial intelligence and robotics are taking over many, many different jobs. Our students won't work in those jobs. They're not going to be working in factories. They're not going to be working on helplines. They will prosper by using critical thinking and creative thinking, and by remembering, using their memories for what they learn. So we have to do that. What do we know? What do we know after all this? We're just drawing to the close here. I hope we have time for a few questions. Struggle and think. Think, right? That's really what we have to do. Relying on AI tools diminishes critical thinking and it lowers creative thinking. So, we have to cast them aside a little bit and find traditional teaching for students really to understand. To learn, students need to struggle with ideas. It's not just about the answers. And, if it was just about the answers, we would say, oh, okay, hello, children, come into the library. I'm going to lock the door for 12 years. Come out when you're educated, right? No, we don't do that. They can't just learn by being in a library. They have to struggle with the ideas. They have to come to personal conclusions around it. So that, that giving difficult questions helps to do that. On-screen information of all kinds is less likely to be remembered. Students need have to have processes. Even looking at something online and then discussing it or writing about it or reflecting on it in some way helps. Teachers and students need to engage with AIs in ways that support learning. So think about how can it help learning, not can it replace teaching in the classroom and elsewhere. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this presentation. I think we have some time for questions, comments, any suggestions. Again, the most valuable thing here, I'm Dr. Ken Beatty. My email is right there, kenbeatty@mac.com. If you don't have time for questions right now, or if you wake up later and think about them, then please, reach out to me. I'm happy to hear from you. Okay, all right, Avi, Chantel?